biggest question we've been wondering till this date. Who is Satoshi Nakamoto? Please welcome Paul Grewal, Chief Legal Officer from Coinbase, Tristan Scherlicker, and moderator Sam Reynolds. Together, they will conduct a forensic investigation into the identity and mystery of Satoshi Nakamoto.
All right. Okay, so we don't know exactly who Satoshi is, but we know that it's not Craig Wright. And that's thanks to the efforts of these two fellows and their team behind them, which proved through a long court case that Craig Stephen Wright is not Satoshi. So let's start with this, actually. Who is Craig Wright? We know the name Craig Wright now from media coverage of the case, from his lawsuits. But who is he, and why did he claim he's Satoshi?
Well, I'm happy to go first. And first of all, and I should begin by saying thank you all for having us. This is a tale that needs to be told, and we welcome this opportunity to share our story with you. Craig Wright is an Australian computer scientist and researcher by training. And over the course of really nearly a decade or more, began to build a public case that he was, in fact, Satoshi Nakamoto, the author of the original Bitcoin white paper and the individual singularly responsible for the emergence of Bitcoin and the development of blockchain technologies more generally. The case that Dr. Wright began to build began, oddly enough, in the context of taxes in Australia, where he was claiming a certain research and development tax credits as a result of what he asserted was his work developing the original concept behind Bitcoin. And from there it built and built and grew until the point where he was claiming publicly not only certain tax credits, but ultimately copyrights in source code, copyrights in the white paper itself. A patent portfolio soon emerged, and over time, claims were asserted not just adverse to the tax authorities in Australia, but against individual developers, software programmers all over the world, large corporates like Coinbase and others, and ultimately culminating in claims of defamation against those who would dispute his right to assert himself as the Satoshi Nakamoto. All of that brought us to a very august setting, the High Court in the UK, where we were ultimately able to challenge these claims and prove, as you point out, Sam, that whoever Satoshi Nakamoto may be, it is not Dr. Craig Wright.
So then how do you prove this to a court? Because everyone here knows about blockchain, knows about all that kind of stuff, but a judge might not. So in a courtroom, how did you guys prove that Craig Wright was not Satoshi? Because the burden of proof there is quite high.
So that's a really important question. And the burden of proof always rests on the people who are bringing the case. And of course, we brought the case to Craig Wright at home where he lives in the UK. But it's important to remember that he also sued many other people. He had a burden of proof as well. So we were very fortunate to be blessed with a judge who really took an interest, understood the technology and understood the facts, and looked for many hours of many days of many months at everything that was filed before him, and came to a decision weighing up what was put forward by Craig Wright and what was put against Craig Wright by the industry. So the answer is through a very long and careful process of determination and gathering evidence so the whole picture can be seen.
Okay, is there a certain smoking gun you had that was the piece of evidence that a judge said, okay, wow, that's it. We know now that he's not Satoshi?
There were hundreds.
There were hundreds, of course, right? But what was your standout piece, perhaps?
In a normal case, a smoking gun is something to celebrate because at that point you know that you're on the correct side. We experienced that week after week as our investigation progressed. I think the one that hits hardest is a particular document which Craig Wright put forward in court after court across the world. It's a simple, single A4 page of handwritten text, and according to Craig Wright, it's his meeting minutes from the first meeting where Bitcoin was ever discussed, his Genesis block, as you put it earlier. And in Florida, that simple handwritten document couldn't be debunked as a forgery, and in Norway, in the case he brought there, it could not. And even in the UK courts before, it could not, because it was such a simple handwritten document. But what we managed to do over the course of nearly 2 years of investigative effort, we managed to identify the printing factory from which the paper on which it was printed came. And we spoke with the lady in Shenzhen who manages the printing presses which made that pad of paper. And she was able to send us the original print proofs, and we were able forensically to identify that they were many years later than he claimed them to be. And at that point, this document, which has stood up time and again under scrutiny across the globe, fell flat. And that was a wonderful moment to uncover.
Wow, that is insane that you found the factory that made the paper, which claimed that was not actually invented until 2010, you said?
That's right.
After the white paper came out. That is crazy. So Paul, with COPA and Coinbase, why did Coinbase get involved? Because normally, big companies that are on the stock market are quite hesitant to get involved in litigation. But why is Coinbase a big stakeholder in COPA?
So COPA refers to the Crypto Open Patent Alliance. It's a consortium organization of a number of different firms, all of which are committed to preventing and addressing intellectual property abuse against individuals and others involved in developing blockchains and cryptocurrencies more generally. We formed COPA with the idea that, of course, intellectual property always must be respected where it is properly claimed, but that we could not allow IP rights that were unfounded and not grounded in actual truth to cast a shadow over the development of this very important technology. So for Coinbase, we certainly faced our own direct claims by Dr. Wright that we would need to address at the very least. But it became apparent that while we were fortunate and remain fortunate to have the resources to retain the best counsel globally and deploy all the necessary resources in order to show, for example, that the books, as it were, that were pointed to as proof were in fact forgeries, most individual developers, most of those threatened by Craig Wright, do not have these resources. And so it's important for us that we remember that we have a responsibility as one leader, but a leader in digital assets and cryptocurrencies globally, to look out for everyone and to lend our resources where appropriate to fights that we believe in. This was one of those fights. We very much could see in very real and personal terms the toil that so many software developers were suffering under as a result of Craig Wright's claims. Individuals who were not just facing threats of lawsuits or actual lawsuits, but threats against their families, the risk of, or fear of bankruptcy. Things that would really weigh on any person, of course, in that situation, but that we could see with our own eyes were costing a terrible, terrible price for people that were simply just trying to do good work and promote the development of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies more generally. So for us, it was as much about the principle as it was about defending any position, and we're very proud of our contribution to this effort. And at the same time, we recognize it took a village to defeat this man in court, And we worked collectively with many others all over the world to achieve this victory.
For sure. I mean, it's not the first time that open source software has been tested in court, right? Like right now, there are dozens of cases going on in courts around the world about open source software. But why is it important that this case was won for COPA, for Bitcoin? Like, if, for instance, Craig Wright won this case, what would the world look like right now?
Well, what you would see would be a world where Dr. Wright undoubtedly would continue to claim to be the original author of the white paper and the developer of Bitcoin. Claims being asserted against anybody who challenged that under the laws of defamation and libel in particular. Licenses being secured for the right to practice the technologies that have been laid out. And in general, what you would see is a tax being imposed on the continued growth and development of this important technology. That just cannot be allowed to stand, particularly where I think so many of us in this room and all over the world have an interest in seeing Bitcoin and cryptocurrency more generally come to not just thousands or even millions of people around the world, but ultimately billions. It's very important to that mission to clear the air, and that's why we got involved in such a deep way.
I would add that among all of the technology that he asserted ownership of, it went even deeper because he asserted ownership of the word Bitcoin as a trademark. And so the licenses to be sought would be against each exchange, anyone using the blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain for any reason, to call it Bitcoin, potentially.
Potentially everyone in this room and all over the world, right?
You have to pay a tax to then Craig Wright.
Yes.
My goodness. Okay.
Yes.
So, Tristan, this is your first crypto case as counsel. What are some lessons learned from this? Because you're a patent lawyer by trade, so you're familiar with software patents, but crypto is a unique beast on its own, isn't it?
I learned many things working on a crypto case for the first time, and the thing that struck me most wasn't the technology, which was difficult and interesting to learn. It was the sense of community. It was working with people from the very nuts and bolts of Bitcoin, developing it at the open source layer on which it's founded, all the way through to exchanges it, practicing it globally, and everyone in between, people who were involved from day one, people who are just getting involved now, everybody with a common sense of wanting to change the world for the better. That was the most amazing thing to begin to be part of. And once you realize that you're fighting on the side of justice, it's something that was really wonderful to embrace.
Because like crypto and Bitcoin is a real diverse, eclectic crew you wouldn't find at, say, a Linux court case or Microsoft court case, right? It is a group that is partially anonymous, partially, doxed, IRL, wealthy, poor, every race under the sun, right? So I guess that's the beauty of crypto, is that it's the world, would you say?
It ultimately proves, I think, to be its great strength, Sam. I think at the same time, in this case, Dr. Wright sought to exploit some of those differences to his advantage. For example, in many instances, you had claims being asserted against individuals who simply didn't have the resources to challenge them. In one case in particular, you had an individual developer seeking to preserve his anonymity, which of course is very important to the culture of digital assets and cryptocurrencies, and being forced to make a choice between either identifying himself and giving up that anonymity and being able to present a proper challenge. You also had, I think, a very calculated strategy of asserting claims against individuals who could not fight in order to bolster the record that somehow the courts had blessed this concocted theory that somehow Dr. Wright was Satoshi Nakamoto, and then moving on to larger and larger targets with deeper and deeper pockets. And so I think in this case, we saw an attempt to take advantage of that great variety that you've described. I think ultimately, though, what we've proven through this case is that the diversity and heterogeneity of the crypto community is its strength. It's not a weakness.
Right. I guess also people online on crypto Twitter think that Craig Wright is a clown, but he's actually not a clown. It sounds like his strategy was a well-used one, and one that is used by prosecutors to take out the mafia, take out big groups like this. So I guess my question to you is, why is it important to view Craig Wright as not a clown, but as like a real, organized, proper threat here?
Well, what I would say is that we have to take these types of claims very seriously each and every time someone attempts to deny the Bitcoin or cryptocurrency community of technology which belongs to everyone. And while it is easy to sort of dismiss Dr. Wright, given how preposterous and outlandish and ultimately contrary to the truth his claims prove to be, I think the tactics that were relied upon are tactics that this community could and almost certainly will continue to face as we go forward. And I think one of the great lessons, at least for me, has been the power of harnessing that incredible energy online among those who care about Bitcoin and care about crypto. The reality is, you've so eloquently put it, that the tools available to investigate these claims and refute them are tools available to everyone. They're not just in the hands of well-resourced multinationals like Coinbase or law enforcement agencies operating globally. Individuals sitting at home with a laptop and a Wi-Fi connection can actually do the hard work on the blockchain to show the provenance of the data and ownership.
Zach XBT, for instance, right?
Absolutely.
Whoever he is, he's doing work that before, in the TradFi world, would be the domain of investigators, law enforcement, well-paid lawyers, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And I think that, again, this is part of the power of this community, that you can get the best ideas from the best sources, regardless of where they went to school or who they work for or what their financial resources may be. This is a real revolution. It's a real change in how we address these types of claims that I think offer lessons not just for crypto, frankly, but for all sorts of other industries if they were to choose to embrace the ethos behind the open source software movement.
I will say that if Craig Wright's claim seemed like a clown show by the end, it was only because of the efforts from not just my team at Bird & Bird that I was working with, but people across the whole community weighing in together to expose the problems, to expose the lies. And had that not been done cooperatively in the way it was, the result might have looked very different. Perhaps we wouldn't have had the resources to present each and every one of the pieces of evidence as an exposed forgery. Perhaps we wouldn't have been able to delve deeply enough to discover that paper factory's original records. It was the cooperation that made that possible. And speaking from someone who is learning about crypto through the lens of this case and beyond, I'd encourage everyone to keep that feeling of community together and build on it, because it's a wonderful thing.
So while Dr. Wright is now in the past, right, there might be a new Craig Wright in the future. What are some lessons learned from this case that would prevent this next Craig Wright from launching this, multi-year, multinational war on crypto?
I think there are at least a handful of lessons that ought to be applied in almost every case, and we'll continue to learn lessons as matters proceed, because it is certainly the case that Dr. Wright's experience with the legal system is not quite yet over. There has been a referral to prosecutors for consideration of further action against him in the criminal context. That will play out in due course, but in the meantime, I think there are some important lessons for us. First and foremost is the value of being very public and transparent about experiences that any of us are suffering with these types of malevolent actors. I've happened to have been practicing law now for over 25 years. And over the course of my career, I've had to unlearn many lessons that I originally learned as a trainee and as a baby lawyer. And one of the most important lessons I originally learned that I had to unlearn was this idea that disputes like those with Craig Wright needed to be kept private. They needed to be resolved quietly, outside of the public view, and outside of any public conversation about their merits. Now, there remain matters like that I think will continue, but one of the great lessons I've learned since that original training and as a result of my time in crypto is that there is great power in laying out for the community's review and understanding and input the claims that one faces and the evidence that's being relied upon in order to make those claims. It's something at Coinbase that we have adopted in a variety of contexts that go far beyond just Dr. Wright. I never imagined I would be spending so much time practicing law, for example, on Twitter, or consulting with our friends in various subreddits for potential evidence in cases. And yet, I think what we have learned from this crowdsourcing model, this what I call litigating in open public, is that you can develop a much stronger sense of the record and a much stronger public narrative and frankly, much greater public support than you might otherwise be able to from privately addressing these issues on a one-off basis. In a way, by the way, that the Craig Wrights of the world count on. It's a divide and conquer strategy. Yeah. And what we're saying is, no, we're not going to be divided, and if we stick together, we're not going to be conquered.
As an example of that, sharing of information and the power of it, we've made the decision to publish for the public record every shred of evidence entered on behalf of COPA in this case. It's available online. It's saved on the Internet Archive for the historical record, and you can go and click on it and read it. And should there be another attack from him or his people in the future, perhaps that would help nip it in the bud. Or if there's a similar attack, perhaps there are lessons to be learned from the approach taken. So we do hope that that helps defend against the next.
I like to say that GitHub repositories are not just good for source code.
Right.
They're also quite effective for sharing legal documents as well.
Because if this went through arbitration under NDAs, oh my God, it'd be a lot different. It'd be a lot more closed off. And I think folks would still care about it, but they wouldn't know what's going on, I guess.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the role of the public courts in this, Sam, because the reality is that I think this case illustrates why we are so lucky in so many jurisdictions, in so many countries all over the world, to have strong judges with strong institutional commitments willing to do the hard work of assessing the evidence, weighing conflicting testimony, shining a bright light on dark claims that are ultimately refuted as forgeries, and as was the case here that Tristan just described. The courts are incredibly important, and yes, there are certainly instances where private settlements and private arbitrations are legitimate and even important. But in matters like this, where there is a broader public interest that goes just beyond whether or not a particular defendant is liable for defamation or one company or another ought to pay a licensing fee for using source code or referencing a name, where there is a claim being made to history, I think the courts really are uniquely qualified and situated to provide clarity and finality that we all crave and deserve.
Because the court that heard the case in London was a specialist court that dealt with software patents only, and the judge had a strong background in software. Is that correct?
The judge has a strong background in software. He handles cases across the realm of intellectual property, but Mr. Justice Meller is the name of the judge. He's got an engineering background, an interest in justice, and an interest in technology. But ultimately, the technical complexity of this case was not in the blockchain or the Bitcoin software, but in fact in the technical evidence that exposed the forgeries and the many thousands of pages that went into that.
Great. Okay, so I guess now to wrap things up, looking forward at the future and the future of crypto, the future of open source software, why is this case an important milestone in that future, right? If you look at, say, the Web 2 world and IP law there, the Microsoft case against Mozilla on the Firefox Netscape was a big one to set the tone for patent law in Web 2. So why in Web 3 is this important?
Well, I think it's important because we have shown that whatever their flaws may be and whatever limitations may exist, legal systems are equipped to address these challenges, by and large, across a range of cases. And so I think we have validated that a very traditional set of institutions all over the world remain quite relevant and quite important, even as the technologies and the issues evolve very quickly. The other thing I would just say is that it's very important to understand that technology does not evolve and develop in a vacuum, that there will be individuals and organizations that emerge from time to time that will try to claim credit and extract value where they have no legitimate claim at all. And it's, I think, critical that we all assume a certain responsibility for addressing that where we see it. It's one of the reasons why we formed COPA in the first place and are now a very proud, active participant in it. And I would be remiss if I didn't take advantage of this opportunity to encourage any and all of you watching this that if you have an interest in keeping crypto free from bogus intellectual property claims and preserving the right of individual developers and others to operate without these kinds of threats, get involved in COPA. Go visit us online and learn more about how you can be a part of this. And at the very least, where you have information or insights that can be useful to the cases that are being defended, share them and participate and get involved. It's critically important for all of our collective success.
I absolutely encourage people to take that advice. From what I've seen of COPA from the outside, the motives are entirely in line with the mission objective, which is available for all to read on your website. It seems like a wonderful idea. We've all seen nascent technologies tear themselves apart through infighting, especially with bogus claims. It's very easy to launch a claim, and it can be difficult to defend one. So cooperation is key. I'd also say, don't lose sight of the fact that this is an entire industry built on the work of some extremely intelligent, extremely driven, volunteer open source developers. Without their work, the industry would not be there, and this is software that needs to be maintained, it needs to be supported. And it's all too easy as a volunteer developer without the backing of a legal team to blunder into a patent infringement by accident just as you're upgrading the software. So do what you can as an industry to protect the input of those wonderful people who are making it happen.
Because it was a David and Goliath case. Most developers don't have a spare 6 figures lying around to hire someone like you or you to fight this case, right? So I guess the importance of COPA is that collective of people who are resourced to help out defend against bad actors.
Absolutely. We can accomplish so much more if we work together than we can individually. And even for those organizations and individuals who have a certain number of resources, there is just I think, power that comes from the wisdom of the crowds and from insights that are shared and tested and challenged across jurisdictions, across legal systems, and in real time. And so I think that power of collective action here has been proven through our success with this particular case. But I just want to also encourage everyone that this is not the end of it, that we will face additional threats to the further development of Bitcoin and crypto from spurious actors. And it's just very, very important that we not lose sight of the fact that in addition to the individual success and personal success we all hope to enjoy from our participation, there is a responsibility to keep things safe for everyone.
Is there something on your radar that you might want to be concerned about as COPA?
Well, I'm particularly worried about the emergence of spurious patent litigation, hence our name, the Open Patent Alliance. And it should be noted that in Dr. Wright's case, patents were part of the collective threat, and in some cases remain part of the collective threat against Bitcoin developers all over the world. So that's one to keep an eye on, and that's a particular type of legal claim that is well positioned for defense based on research, publication, and work done by others all over the world that can show the original or the origination of an idea or the source of truth.
Okay, Tristan, you get the last word.
I would say keep an eye out for developments. Don't just benefit from the power of that community, but be part of it. If you see some swelling developments, Don't let them grow into an uncontrollable threat. Discuss it. Find a way to combat it together. Don't let these things grow up just because they were ignored.
Exactly. Well, gents, that was great. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.